Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're covering my pick for the best fighter build in Baldur's Gate 3. This is another update video to my previous video of the same name, because that video was recorded more than 6 months ago before Honor Mode had released, and so I wanted to update that video so we have a fighter build for the modern era. The game has been patched significantly, so my previous video contains information that is no longer true thanks to patches and game updates, and also we've learned some lessons as to how to build characters over the last 8 months of gameplay, so we definitely can update the build significantly. I will also here be focusing on a melee fighter, because I think that a lot of the information online for fighter builds is for thrown weapon fighters, which is of course an extremely powerful way to play the character, and I have builds up for that if you're interested in that playstyle. But for people who are looking to play a fighter, as a melee character who's running into combat and hitting things, there's not a lot of information out there, so I wanted to provide a guide for people who are looking for a powerful, simple build that will work in any party extremely well, and always be an excellent way to add some damage, utility, and power to a given party. So let's build a fighter. The great thing about Fighter is that, as a class, it always works. Fighter is extremely reliable. It may not be the flashiest class, but it is a class that will always do exactly what it is supposed to extremely well, and can be added to just about any party in order to improve its consistency. That's very important in Dungeons & Dragons, because a lot of effects in D&D are inconsistent or binary. If you cast a spell with a saving throw, an enemy who saves against that spell often suffers no ill effect at all. And so having a character that can pretty much always get the thing done that it's intending to get done is always very valuable. Fighters, simply by virtue of existing on the battlefield, do a lot of the thing that their character is supposed to be doing. Placing a fighter next to an enemy mage or squishy ranged character significantly constrains what that enemy is able to do. And so even if your fighter misses their attacks, which you're also very good at not doing, you will still be able to impact the game strategically in extremely significant ways just by existing. This reliability is incredibly important, especially on Honor Mode, but on any difficulty setting, because on Honor Mode you will have things go wrong pretty frequently. Fighters are very resilient to play mistakes. They're very resilient to bugs. They're very resilient to getting home tired from work and just not playing very well. And it's a great way to ensure that your party always has a backup safety option, is to have a fighter who will be powerful, simple to execute, and extremely effective no matter what the circumstances or the composition they're surrounded with. Fighters also, as a result of this, make one of the best possible character builds for newer players. So if you're new to Dungeons & Dragons, new to Baldur's Gate 3, or if you're trying to introduce someone who is new to the game in a co-op campaign or something, this build I would highly recommend for new players, because it is both extremely powerful and extremely effective with relatively minimal inputs, but also gives them a lot of room to explore some of the game mechanics and learn how to play the game as they go. So there's a lot of great reasons to play a fighter, and amongst those reasons is the sheer power level, because fighters have one of the strongest endgame potentials of any character class. Getting 3 attacks in a single action is absurdly strong, and so your damage output will be second to none in the late game, in addition to the extreme reliability that you bring to your party. In terms of race or background pick for your fighter, you have immense flexibility here, and can pick pretty much anything you want based on the flavor of the character that you're looking for. Fighters are an extremely independent class. They get all of their weapon and armor proficiencies already, so you're not looking for those from your race or background picks. And you already have all of the skills that you care about, because you only really care about one skill on a fighter, and that's athletics. So Fighter already provides for itself all of the things that it wants from a race or background pick, and can operate pretty independently of those. For the most mechanically optimal choices, there's a couple races that stand out as being slightly better than the others, though I want to emphasize that these are relatively small gains, and those are Wood Elf for the additional movement speed, which is incredibly useful for any melee character, of course. Being able to close the distance to vulnerable enemies more easily is excellent. Githyanki for the Misty Step, which of course is convenient because Lae'zel is already a Githyanki, and and because there are Githyanki unique weapons scattered throughout the game that will be more powerful if you're playing a Githyanki. And surprisingly, Gnome. Gnome gets advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws, all 3 mental saves, and that is very useful. One of the very few things your fighter might struggle with throughout the game is passing these mental saves because you don't have proficiency in them, and it can be debilitating if your fighter gets struck by a fear or charm or, worst case scenario, a dominate effect. A fighter who turns against your party is extremely dangerous, so Gnome's advantage on those saves can be used to prevent that, and is therefore pretty good as a fighter pick. In terms of our attribute points, which of course we have to fix because Lae'zel's default attribute points are terrible, there are really 2 directions that we can go. The standard and sort of default way to build this character, and what I'm going to recommend for this build guide, takes 17 in strength, 14 dexterity, 16 in constitution, and 10 in wisdom. Wisdom is the most important of the mental saves, so we have the extra 2 points in wisdom. Often you will see me take 16 rather than 17, because odd numbers in this game are typically pretty weak, but there's a reason that we want an odd number in strength, and that is the Athlete feat. Athlete lets us gain 1 point in strength, which will be very useful, and so doesn't cost us any actual strength, but also increases our jump distance massively. Fighters' mobility is based on their jump distance. Fighters will be jumping most turns of combat in order to get to an appropriate target, and so the Athlete feat will be very important for us later on down the line, and gives us a lot of additional options during our gameplay, because we will be able to reposition very easily in combat. One of the best spells in the game, I talked about this for Githyanki already, is Misty Step, which lets you reposition 60 feet as a bonus action. A fighter with Athlete basically gets that every single turn because they can jump up to 60 feet pretty easily with a single bonus action, and so will be able to reposition their character to anywhere on most battlefields very effectively. The other option for attribute points is, because this is a strength character in Baldur's Gate 3, we have the option of taking no strength at all and instead using elixirs of hill giant strength. If we do that, we would take 17 in dexterity, 16 in constitution, and 15 in wisdom, and then stockpile elixirs of hill giant strength every in Act 1, enough to last us the entire game, and simply drink one every day. That sets your strength to 21, so you can skip taking points in strength if you do that. To do that, you are probably going to forego the Athlete feat, but that's okay because you get a lot of extra stats out of it, so it's a worthy trade-off. It's probably the stronger way to play the character, but does involve drinking a consumable every day, so for this build we are going to recommend the other attribute spread. For our skill proficiencies, the only thing that we care about is that we have athletics. Fighters, by default, don't use their bonus action for much from their class levels, but they get the default bonus actions that are available to every character in Baldur's Gate, and they use them better than anyone else. Athletics to shove enemies around is an incredibly powerful tool for a fighter, because you'll have high strength, and you'll be able to reposition to anywhere on the map pretty easily, so you will be due to your resilience and mobility. So you'll be able to shove enemies around. Repositioning enemies is really powerful. You can push them off of cliffs, into hazardous effects, down off of ledges, and so on. Or just cluster enemies up for AoE effects for your party mates, and that is an incredibly powerful tool to have access to. For our second skill, you're going to want to take Perception, because it's just nice to have as many characters as possible able to roll Perception at high levels. That makes you more likely to see traps and stuff. And for our last point here, there's actually nothing that we particularly need. You won't be doing dialogue, so Insight doesn't matter. Acrobatics is redundant with Athletics, so you can take Survival as a quality of life tool just to make it a little easier to find chests. You can dig for chests even if you fail the Survival check, but this makes it fewer clicks, and it's not like you're using these skills for anything else. because fighters are not a skill-based class. Finally, for our fighting style, we are going to take Great Weapon Fighting. Although defense is also a great option, and if you are doing the elixir build and therefore have more feats, you may want to take defense instead. Great Weapon Fighting, though, lets you re-roll the damage dice on your two-handed weapons, which is any damage dice. So a greatsword, which rolls 2d6, if you roll a 1 or 2 on either of those dice, you re-roll them. So it's a huge damage boost to the most common two-handed weapon that you're going to have, and makes your character extremely reliable at doing damage. Reliability is the fighter's watchword, so you don't want to have the chance of rolling low damage, and Great Weapon Fighting prevents that. Alright, that's level 1. Let's move on to level 2. At level 2, there's no decisions that we have to make as we level up, but we do get access to the single best class feature in the entire game, Action Surge. Action Surge lets you get an extra turn, effectively, an extra action. So at level 2, it lets you make a second full attack. Doubling your damage output once per short rest is incredible, and it only gets better as your actions get better. Action Surge is the only way in Honor Mode to make multiple attacks with a single extra action. Haste potions and elixirs of bloodlust do not give you your full number of extra attacks, but Action Surge still will. So a fighter in the late game can make 6 attacks in a turn by 3 attacks with each of their actions, whereas other characters will be capped out at 3. This is an incredible benefit for fighters, giving them massive amounts of damage and making you one of the highest burst damage characters in the entire game. Action Surge is just so powerful, and you should weigh carefully when to use it because it's one of the best tools that you have available. No decisions to make, though, so let's level to level 3. At level 3, we get to choose our subclass. Now, all 3 of these are viable, and I think that there are lots of neat ways that you can build all 3 of them, but for a fighter who wants to hit things in melee, I think that there is a clear choice, and that is Battlemaster. This is also nice because it's sort of lore-friendly for Lae'zel and everything, but Battlemaster is so good because the Battlemaster maneuvers are extremely powerful, enable you to do a lot of stuff, and give you a lot of versatility in combat. You get to choose between a number of Battlemaster maneuvers, but almost every fighter is going to want at least want their first 3 maneuvers to be the same 3. These are Riposte, because this gives you a reaction. When an enemy attacks you and misses you, which they'll do pretty regularly because of your very high armor class, you get to hit them back. Fighters normally don't have a lot of great uses for their reaction, so the ability to spend a superiority die for an extra attack when it's not your turn is incredibly useful to every fighter. Next, Precision Attack. Being able to spend a superiority die and add a d8 to your chance to hit is enormous. Lots of enemies in the game will be hard to hit, and a precision attack, especially when combined with advantage from some other source, is going to make it much easier for you to land those critical attacks. In particular, next level, when we take Great Weapon Master, Precision Attack negates entirely the to-hit chance of Great Weapon, almost entirely the to-hit penalty of Great Weapon Master. Precision Attack at this level is an average plus 4.5 to your attack. Great Weapon Master is minus 5. So that means you're basically getting plus 10 damage on every precision attack without any penalty. That's a huge damage boost at this early of a level, and makes this character's damage output absurd and very reliable thanks to Precision Attack. Finally, the last one that we're going to want is Trip Attack. Being able to do extra damage with at least one of our maneuvers is very helpful. The ability to add the d8 and have that be extra damage, and then of course that gets multiplied if you critically hit, is very powerful. So at least one of these we want to be one of the maneuvers that increases our damage, and the ability to knock enemies prone is really powerful. This is really good both for this character when later on you're making multiple attacks in a round, and so you can knock an enemy prone, and then any subsequent attacks you make against them have advantage, and also for any allies who are making attacks against the prone enemy, they'll have advantage. It's great to set up rogues for sneak attack, it's great to set up Any other melee characters that might be in your party, especially paladins, love advantage because it makes them more likely to get a critical smite. So this works really well with your party and also helps set up this character extremely effectively itself. So these three I would recommend for just about every battle master as your first three maneuvers, and then later on as we pick more maneuvers we will have a little more flexibility with which ones we pick. This gives you a lot of different options for what you're doing in combat, which is of course what's great about fighters. At fighter level 4, we get our first feat. And the feat that we're going to take, no matter what attribute spread we took, is going to be Great Weapon Master. Now, you might think we want to take Athlete right away in order to even out our strength, and I don't think that you actually do. I think that Athlete is obviously very good, but Great Weapon Master is more important to this character's function. The ability to hit for plus 10 damage, especially this early, decreases the number of attacks that you are going to take against enemies significantly. And standard enemy around level 4 probably has about 20 or 30 hit points, and so you are taking the number of attacks that it takes to kill that enemy from 3 to 2 or from 2 to 1, depending on the number of on how tough that particular enemy is. It also massively improves your character against bosses, and even though you have the -5 attack roll penalty, this character has just taken a bunch of excellent ways to mitigate that penalty, meaning that you can always land your Great Weapon Master attacks with the additional damage. This plays especially well with a Cleric ally who can give you Bless, because that will make you even more likely to land these, but it's not necessary. The math on this works out to where it's more average damage to have Great Weapon Master on essentially all the time, but in terms of strategy with Great Weapon Master, I would choose to toggle it off if my chance to hit an enemy was 30% or lower, because sometimes you just need to land some damage, and if you toggle that off, you'll go from a 30% chance to a 55% chance, which will be significantly better odds of actually landing your attacks and give the enemy fewer turns. You will almost always get more average damage with Great Weapon Master on, but average damage isn't the be-all and end-all of things. Accuracy does help as well, so that's a good rule of thumb for optimizing your Great Weapon Master damage. You'll miss a little more often, but you'll do more damage when you hit, and that works out better in your favor. Also, you get, when you land a critical hit or kill an enemy, which we're going to be doing very regularly thanks to our very high damage and reliability of our attacks, you get to make an additional attack as a bonus action. I already mentioned that fighters will sometimes struggle to use their bonus actions. Well, an attack is the best thing you can be doing as a fighter, and this will mean we will very regularly get to make extra attacks in our turn, so we'll be going from 2 attacks in an action surge turn to 3, or 1 attack to 2 in non-action surge turns, meaning that we're making more attacks than most other characters already, and that only will increase as we continue to level up, because this gives us optimal uses for all of our actions. Great Weapon Master, therefore, is critical to this character. I highly recommend taking it early. At fighter level 5, we don't get any decisions, but we do get extra attacks, so now our actions make 2 attacks, and our action surge actions make 2 attacks, meaning we're going from 2 to 4 attacks, or from 4 to 5 attacks if we happen to kill an enemy, and can use our Great Weapon Master attack. We also get Misty Step if we are a Githyanki, which is particularly useful for this character as well, because positioning next to enemies is really good, and like I said, you don't have a lot of other uses for your bonus action. Every character in Dungeons & Dragons, every turn of combat has 5 resources that they can use. Their action, their reaction, their bonus action, their movement, and their concentration. Fighters will rarely be using concentration because they don't cast spells, but the other 4 actions are ones that you want to make sure you're using optimally. Fighters inherently have excellent uses for their actions and movement because they're melee characters, so they want to move next to enemies and they want to hit them. But reactions and bonus actions we need to work a little harder to use, and so that's why we select what we select, so that we can make sure that we're using all of our resources to their greatest potential. Next up, level 6, where we get a second feat. Fighters are the only character that gets a feat at level 6, so this gives us great access to more powerful tools as we level up our character. The feat that we're going to take here is Athlete, and we're going to increase our strength to 18, so we get a strength bonus. And this also allows us to jump 50% further, meaning that our jump distance is now enormous. The ability to clear the entire arena in a single jump is very powerful for a fighter. I've talked about that already, and of course makes us much better at getting on priority targets. If you took the Hill Giant Elixir build, then you won't be taking Athlete. Instead, you'll just even out your Dexterity and your Wisdom with an ASI, or you can take Alert this early, because Alert is really good, obviously, on Honor mode, so those are your two options if you are using the Elixir stat spread. At fighter level 7, we get 2 more maneuvers, which is nice because we get to add a few more things to our arsenal, and the ability to make decisions about which maneuvers we're using is pretty nice because it lets us be a little more versatile in our choices in combat. I'm going to recommend that you take Disarming Attack because there are lots of enemies who can be profitably disarmed, and you can prevent them from being able to do anything for the rest of combat, basically, if you disarm an enemy and then pick up their weapon. And for the other option, we're going to take Pushing Attack. Being able to push an enemy with an attack means we don't have to spend a bonus action shoving them, and so can knock enemies off of ledges or into walls of fire that our allies have set up. Notice that this comes at level 7, right when we get a lot of the best hazardous terrain spells on our allies, and so we can move up to an enemy and, while doing great damage, also punt them back into a Hunger of Hadar or a Wall of Fire or something that they have painstakingly escaped, but our fighter just walks up and puts the boot in to knock them right back into it. This gives us a lot of additional options for repositioning enemies or shutting them down in combat, so it gives us a lot of extra flexibility. The other option here, I think, is Menacing Attack, because Frightened is very good against melee enemies, but I like these two a little more in terms of how they actually play out in combat. At fighter level 8, we get another feat, and the feat that we are going to take here is Alert. You could take an ability improvement in strength, go up to 20 strength, but I think that going first is so important on Honor mode that I highly recommend every character who can gets Alert at least by level 8, because you will be able to shut down enemies much more easily if you go first. Alert is a massive bonus. It takes our initiative bonus from +2 to +7, so it almost guarantees that we go before most enemies in the game, and gives us a lot of additional options there. If you already have Alert because you're the Elixir build, so you took Alert at level 6, you have a lot more options for what feat you're going to take at this level. There's a few that will help a lot, and so I'm going to just go through them in order. Mage Slayer is pretty nice because this character will always want to be next to enemy spellcasters as much as possible to hit them, so Mage Slayer just makes it easier to do that. Mobile is very good because it increases your movement speed. I already talked about how important movement speed is to this character. And being able to make a melee attack without provoking and then move without provoking isn't that useful, but does come up occasionally. Mostly this is just for the bonus movement speed, though. Savage Attacker gives you the most possible damage, because it lets you reroll your attack dice. Though note that Savage Attacker doesn't play super well with Great Weapon Fighter, the one that lets you reroll your damage dice. So if you do that, you'll likely want to take Defense Fighting Style instead of Great Weapon Fighting Style, if you're going to take Savage Attacker, and that will get you the most possible value. Or Sentinel is extremely helpful as well for this character, because shutting down enemy movement and trapping them next to you is great, and the ability to make more opportunity attacks, more reaction attacks, is also really excellent. Of those 4 options, the one that I would recommend most is Sentinel, because I think it gives you the most possible options in combat, and that will make your party the strongest overall. But if you're just looking to optimize damage, Savage Attacker is good, and there's a lot of other options here that help as well. One thing that's also worth mentioning is Martial Adept, because it gives you an additional superiority die every short rest as a Battlemaster fighter. I don't recommend this, because I think that you won't typically run out of superiority dice, or you won't typically get enough value out of the single additional superiority die to justify spending a feat on it, but it does work pretty well with Battlemaster Fighter because it just gives you additional maneuvers and dice, so that's another option. Anyways, for this build though, we are taking Alert and moving on to level 9. At fighter level 9, we get Indomitable, which lets us re-roll failed saving throws, which is very helpful because we have relatively low wisdom saving throws, and also this works with normal sources of advantage or other bonuses that we might have from Bless or any gear that we might have to make it much less likely that we fail saving throws, especially saves that we're proficient in, Strength and Dexterity, but, Constitution, Strength and Constitution, excuse me. But in particular, this is useful for our wisdom saves because those are the ones we're most worried about failing. And so any bonuses that we can get to our saves work extremely well with Indomitable to make fighters much more reliable starting at level 9, which is very, very helpful going on into the late game. At fighter level 10, we get to improve our combat superiority dice, which is very nice. It just increases the damage of all our maneuvers, the accuracy of our precision attacks, and so on. And we get to choose 2 more maneuvers. And the maneuvers that I'm going to recommend here are taking Menacing Attack, because frightening a target can be pretty useful. An enemy who's frightened can't move, so you can hit an enemy, frighten them, and run away from them, which is pretty nice as well. And then one that at first glance looks pretty bad, but at this point we have a lot of our combat options on lock anyways. We've already got our default actions for our turn, and if you want a sort of just like higher damage one between menacing, pushing, and trip and disarming attack, you will have plenty of options for disrupting enemies. So rather than spend an additional maneuver choice on something that kind of does the same thing, let's add an extra dimension to our character and take Rally. A superiority die for 8 temporary hit points is not a particularly good trade on paper, right? But we won't use it that often, and when it does come up, it can be an extremely useful panic button for an ally who's otherwise going to die. This is not something that I recommend using frequently, Rally, as a default action, but it's better to have the option for a panic button than it is to just get another redundant option for our maneuvers. And so I like taking it here because it gives us an additional option for our character when we already have excellent options for our actual attacks. We can now have another dimension to our combat presence in case we really need a panic button. Again, not something that you're going to use that frequently, but it's really nice to add it in as an option for the character. At level 11, we get the other best class feature in the game, Improved Extra Attack. Being able to make 3 attacks with a single action is massive. This means we can unload enormous amounts of damage with Action Surge. This is 6 attacks by default before we get any other buffs, and usually 7 because we'll probably kill or land a critical hit somewhere within those 6 attacks, and so can make a 7th attack as a bonus action. That's more attacks than just about any other character is capable of doing, and we're doing these all as fully featured 2-handed main hand attacks. So they get all of our strength bonuses, they get all the damage of our weapon, they get the very high base damage of our weapon, because we're probably using a great sword or great axe or something like that, and so we can output staggering amounts of damage. They all also get the bonus from Great Weapon Master, so you get the plus 10 damage on each of them for a total of flat 70 additional damage already. That's a huge amount of damage. Improved Extra Attack is awesome. Doesn't change the strategy of our character significantly, but is one of the reasons why Fighter is so powerful in the first place. Finally, at Fighter level 12, we take a feat and we just improve our strength to 20 so that we can land our attacks most optimally and do as much damage as possible. You will probably have found ways to increase your strength by this point. There's a lot of story events that can increase your strength, and so you'll probably have more than 20 strength by this point. But 20 strength as a baseline will let you very reliably hit enemies, do enormous amounts of damage, because each attack is adding plus 15 at base before any item effects or anything, thanks to your strength and Great Weapon Master, and you're making so many attacks per round that this character does an enormous amount of damage extremely reliably. As always, fighters are built to be as reliable as possible, and the Battlemaster Fighter, 12 levels of it, makes you incredibly solid for any party. That being said, we can improve this character with items and multiclassing, so let's talk about those. For items for this character, the key word again is versatility. Fighters can actually be very item independent. We don't need to hunt down any specific items for our playthrough unless we're using the Strength Elixir build. If you are using the Strength Elixir build, then you are going to, of course, want to collect as many Elixirs of Hill Giant Strength as you can and use one of these every day as normal. For non-elixir builds, or for elixir builds in general, the only other item that I would really want you to look out for is some way to cast Misty Step. Misty Step is just critical on every character, so getting that on a Battlemaster fighter is very useful because being able to reposition is so good. It's less important for the fighter, for the athlete fighter, because you can see we've got this much jump distance, and we've got this much Misty Step distance. So in the late game, we'll be able to jump almost as far as we could Misty Step, but Misty Step still allows you to reposition to areas that are not in direct line of effect, so you can Misty Step to places that you can't jump to because the path is interrupted or whatever. Like, for example, we can Misty Step to here, but we can't jump to there, thanks to the ceiling. So it's still very useful to have Misty Step available. Other things that are really important are just the highest armor class heavy armor that you can find. Heavy armor is surprisingly uncontested in Baldur's Gate. Most characters are going to want to be in medium armor because typically it's more powerful, but Battlemaster fighters use heavy armor really well. The fact that we have 14 dexterity means we can use medium armor for the early game when medium armors tend to be stronger, but in the late game we're just going to want the highest armor class heavy armor available. That's all that really matters to us, is just the armor class on it, because we just don't want to get hit. In the early game that's probably going to be the adamantine splint, and in the later game it's going to be just increasing your AC anytime you see a higher AC number. Next, we are going to want anything that increases our saving throws. This is really important for a fighter, because our saving throws are our one weak point, is our relatively low wisdom save. So anything that can increase our wisdom saving throws, give us immunity to fear, charm, domination, or other wisdom save targeting effects, is very important. So keep an eye out for things like the Cloak of Protection or other ways to boost your saves. Finally, we're going to want the highest damage two-handed weapon we can find, and in particular, you're looking for weapons like greatswords or mauls that do 2d6 of damage, rather than weapons like axes that do 1d12 of damage. That's because of how Great Weapon Fighter works. You reroll 1s or 2s on the damage dice of your weapon, and so having 2d6 gives you more chances to trigger that and leads to higher average damage. A combination that I quite like in the middle and end game too, this is just a fun specific weapon combination, is the Soulbreaker Greatsword and the Gauntlets of the War Master. The Soulbreaker Greatsword gives us two things we want. It's a greatsword, it gives us extra damage, it works very well because it's a Githyanki specific weapon, but it also gives us +2 to initiative, which is really nice, and it has the Soulbreaker weapon action. Soulbreaker gives you the chance to stun an enemy for 2 turns, and if you combine that with the Gauntlets of the War Master, enemies have disadvantage on your weapon actions. That means they are very likely to get stunned once per short rest by the Soulbreaker Greatsword, and that's really powerful. It's a stunning effect that's based on your strength, which is really nice, and it lasts for 2 turns, so it's even more powerful than a Monk's Stunning Strike, and enemies will have disadvantage against the save, as well as the saves against all of your maneuvers, which is really nice with the Gauntlets of the War Master. So I recommend those items as some specific items, although I do recommend also experimenting with your glove slot, because you can get additional damage out of stuff like the Flawed Helldusk gloves that just adds damage to your attacks, so there's a lot of different options there as well. Overall, fighters are super flexible. Mostly you're just looking for the highest damage two-handed weapon you can find, the best armor class on a heavy armor you can find, and anything that boosts your saving throw. Finally, for multi-classing for this character, most fighter builds are going to want to stay with only a single level in another class. The reason for this is that you want to hit 11 levels so that your fighter gets your third level, your third weapon attack per action. There's a couple cool options that can really help power up your fighter if you're looking for a 1-level dip. One is Cleric. A single level of Light Domain Cleric can give you the most powerful defensive reaction in the game, making enemy which you can use indefinitely. It costs no resources, and fighters don't typically have a lot of uses for their reaction, so you can use this constantly, making enemies much, much less likely to hit you. Alternatively, a level of War Domain Cleric gets you War Priest charges, which can be used to make bonus action attacks, and that's a great way to add additional damage to your character. Clerics also get a lot of additional utility spells. You can have Bless, which you can concentrate on yourself, making you more likely to hit, and Sanctuary to help out your allies, so there's a lot of options there. Another 1-level dip is Another option for a 1-level dip is to take a level of Sorcerer. Sorcerer gets you the Shield spell, which is less spammable, but even more powerful than Warding Flare, and then also gets you some utility spells like Enhanced Leap that you can cast on yourself, or Magic Missile to give you an extremely reliable ranged option. Even bad spell access is very good on a martial character. And that's the whole reason why Eldritch Knight is a good class. Getting that on a Battle Master with 1 level of Sorcerer means you get to have your cake and eat it too, by having both the spellcasting that you'd get from Eldritch Knight and the maneuvers that you get from Battle Master. If you do that, you want to take Storm Sorcery so that you can use Tempestuous Magic, because it's just the one that gives you the most options. Finally, a single level of Barbarian to gain Rage just lets you do 2 extra damage with every single attack, and that is a huge boost to your character. Really, fighters can do with 1-level dips in just about any other class, but those are the ones that I would recommend. For more involved multi-classing splits, I have lots of builds up mixing Fighter and Ranger, Fighter and Barbarian, Fighter and Rogue, and definitely check out the individual build guides for those, but those are your best options for a fighter-focused multi-classing split. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at the fighter, the best fighter in Baldur's Gate 3, and I hope you enjoyed looking at a character that's a little more straightforward to build than some of the builds I normally do, because I think that this is very helpful to have a solid grounding in build theory when you're building your other characters. As always, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a comment and like the video. Both of those things help me out a ton with the algorithm, so I appreciate it very much, and I do read every comment I get, and you can subscribe to my channel for more of this and other strategy game content. Cheers, folks. I'll catch you next time.